End of 2019, there was a lot of bushfires throughout Australia. It was a hot summer. I think the bushfires started in October 2019. They got worse. And then by January 2020, it got to the stage where there was a lot of devastation and a lot of wildlife were being injured as well. And I think I feel like it was like maybe the 7th or the 9th of January or something like that. Got an email from Anthony and the Wiggles, who emailed a lot of people on the one chain and said, "Look guys, how about the original Wiggles get together and do a show to raise money for the bushfires?" So the money was going to go to the Red Cross and to WIRES, the Wildlife Fund, to help the injured wildlife. So that was, like I said, the 7th or the 9th of January, and the first show was going to be on the first show was supposed to be on the 18th of January. So within 9 days, a venue was booked, production was arranged, cast, band, and tickets were put on sale for that show on the 18th of January. The show for the 18th of January at the Castle Hill RSL Club holds about 800 people. That sold out in 30 seconds, right? So then the thing was put around to us, how about we do an additional show, but we'll do it the day before on the 17th. That's available at the club. So we'll do the 17th and 18th of January. So I thought, okay, cool, we'll do 2 shows. Now, having not done a Wiggles show for a few years, I was a bit like, okay, well, I better get back in shape. It's quite demanding and challenging. So I started walking. I was walking anyway. Every day, pretty much, I'd walk 7.5 Ks. I'd do that in about an hour or so, an hour and 4 minutes it took me to do 7.5 Ks. I was playing competition cricket at the time, competition tennis. I thought I was physically fit, but doing a Wiggles show, that's next level, right? So cricket's hard, you can charge in and bowl a couple of overs or have to run between wickets or chase the ball. Tennis, Wiggles show's hard because you're singing, you're dancing, you're moving around. So I worked harder at my fitness in the lead up to that over those 9 days, and did the show, got on stage, and it was very hot. It was a very hot night. Not that I remember a lot of it, and this is only, the memories that I have are only because of things that I've learnt since what happened at the end of the show. So as the show went on, we got to our last song that we'd planned to do before we went off stage and then came back to do an encore. And that last song was Get Ready to Wiggle, which was our first song and the song that the group was named after. And that was always a tough song to do. There's a lot of dancing, a lot of jumping in that, and it was hard. Anyway, I remember now how hard it was doing that song. Finished the song, thanked the audience, said goodnight, thanks for coming to support the people who are putting out the bushfires and everything. Walked off stage, and I remember bending down to pick up my drink bottle to have a drink, and then that's pretty much the last thing I remember. That's when my heart must have stopped beating. I had a cardiac arrest, and I do remember lying on my back, and I remember struggling to breathe, and at that point in time it was like I remember it just kind of felt like thinking, shit, this must be what it's like to drown. I just kind of remember thinking, like, I can't breathe. But I don't think I panicked. I don't think I was scared or worried. I just had that moment of recognising something wasn't quite right. And then, I think everything just went black, and I kind of vaguely remember rolling onto my side, and that was it. And then, but that moment, thankfully, the poor girl whose feet I collapsed at, she had no idea what had happened. She knew something wasn't right. The other guys in the group, Anthony and Murray, sort of came over to see what was going on, and leading up to the time when I left the group in 2006, I'd gone through this period of time where I was not well, and I was fainting backstage. I'd collapsed a couple of times backstage. I was having trouble breathing on stage sometimes. So I think for them, their immediate thought was, it must be something like what had happened before. I think he's going to be okay, but geez, something doesn't quite look right. So they went and they did the encore without me. Thankfully, the girl whose feet I collapsed at, even though she didn't know what was wrong, she knew something was wrong. She ran across the stage, told our production manager what was happening. He got on the radio straight away and called for somebody to come and help. The person that he called was a lady by the name of Kim Antonelli. She'd just started working for the Wiggles 3 months beforehand. She'd come from a school background where she'd learnt first aid. So I think Luke, who was the manager at the time who radioed, I think he knew that, so he called Kimmy. By the time Kimmy got there, somebody from the audience had jumped up onto the stage. I don't know how on earth she got there, but she was a GP. Therese Wales was her name. She'd come up on the stage, and thankfully between the two of them, they recognised that I wasn't breathing. I was in cardiac arrest. And they flipped me onto my back and they started CPR. Somebody at some stage called 000, obviously, a couple of people did. Somebody at the venue instructed someone to go and get an AED or defibrillator. Somebody went and did that. My parents were there, they were at the show. They came up on stage and they were watching me undergo CPR and all the panic and everything that was going on. And thank God people responded, people did something. And the fact that they did something, the things that they did were the right things, and they saved my life. So by the time the paramedics arrived, my bystanders had called 000, they'd started CPR, and they'd sourced and used an AED to shock me twice. So it was the shock from the AED that got my heart restarted, apparently just as the paramedics were walking into the room. Now, that doesn't mean that the paramedics weren't needed. They were definitely needed and much appreciated too. But I guess what my story highlights is the disparity between somebody who survives a cardiac arrest, which is like 5% of people that have a cardiac arrest. You know, everything went right. And, you know, even if everything goes right at the time, the person still may not survive. And that's not the fault of the people that are responding. It's just the way things happen sometimes. But what we do know is that when people do respond and do get all those things to happen, the chance of survival increases drastically, dramatically. Yeah. So those first minutes when somebody collapses and stops breathing, initial bystander response is absolutely crucial to the fact that that person may go home to their family and have another 6 years now I've had with my family. Because when somebody's heart stops beating, there is a time period within which bystanders can reverse that and get the heart to start beating again. Now that time period is not finite, it's not defined, it's not definitive. It is just you've got to do something as quickly as you can, because that window may be brief, it may be a bit longer, it may be a little bit long, you don't know. And you don't know how long that time period is until you get the AED onto the patient and it can read their heart rhythm. Because when somebody's heart stops beating, a lot of the time cardiac arrest is what we call VF or VT, ventricular fibrillation, where the heart is fibrillating, it's shaking like this because the heart's electrical system has been disrupted. And so the little impulses that tell the heart how to beat aren't working properly. So it's not beating, it's not squeezing and pumping blood around the body. So that person is effectively, dead, because we need blood to be pumping around our body or we don't survive. Yeah. So that's why CPR is so important, because it takes the place of the beating heart. It forces the blood out of the body, out of the heart and around the body, and enables it to fill up again, so that with the next compression, it pushes the blood around the body again. But the crucial thing is, in most cases, that's not going to restart the heart. What restarts the heart is the shock from the AED, and the shock that delivers to the electrical system of the heart, enabling it to start up again on its own and start that beating, that meaningful cardiac output is what we need. So we don't have people continuing trying to do CPR, which may not be high quality in some cases, but it's better than nothing. the best thing to have happen is that that person's heart starts beating on its own again. And it's the shock from the AED that is most likely to get that to happen. So crucial to survival is 3 simple words. Call 000, push, start compressions, and shock. Use the AED to try and shock the heart if it is in that shockable state of VF or VT that can have the shock delivered, and bang, the heart starts to beat again on its own. And I think a lot of people, certainly I didn't know any of that before I needed bystanders to be able to do those 3 things that saved my life. And I say that with the knowledge that my wife is a cardiac nurse, you know, and I didn't know this stuff. You know, she would come home from work and talk about things, and I had no idea what she was talking about, and it sounds terrible. But, you know, for years I'd listened to her talk about, you know, people arresting on the table, or somebody having been brought into the lab to have a stent put in because they arrested in public. And, you know, honestly, those cases are not that many, because not many people who have a cardiac arrest in public make it to the cardiac cath lab to have a stent put in like I did. And, you know, this is where, you know, it's this thing that we call the chain of survival, call, push, shock, extends beyond the members of the public, right? As I said, the paramedics turned up. You know, they had to do their thing. Thank God they were able to clear the clot that was sitting in my heart. To have your dad put a stent in my heart to open up the artery that was blocked. And, you know, that just blows me away. And again, to think that my wife Vanessa does that work every day that she goes to work, and I didn't really know what it was that she did. I just took it for granted that we have these people in the health system that do their job. And I guess that's the beauty of the fact that we have people in the health system. As a layperson, we don't have to know. We don't have to know the ins and outs of it. We trust that these people know what they're doing and that they do a good job. And I guess that's why when Vanessa would come home and talk about stuff, you know, it's like trying to learn logarithms in maths. It's like, what the hell does that term mean? What does that mean? And it's only that. It's only that I survived because of that knowledge and because of other lay people that knew how to save a life, that I was bothered to learn it, you know. And that upsets me to say that, because, you know, to think that I wasn't interested in Vanessa's job because of her, you know, it's not true. It's because I just couldn't understand it. And I would ask a question, then she would try to explain, and she'd still use terms that I just wouldn't understand. You know, it's not easy to understand. But look, afterwards, Vanessa was a massive support to me in learning and understanding, because, you know, she came to the hospital, she looked at the ECG, she saw what she called tombstones. You know, again, what the hell does a tombstone mean when you look at a report? She knew that it was a STEMI. Well, what's a STEMI? You know, so every turn along the way, there's all these terms. So I've now learnt those. But yeah, to think that chain of survival then, you know, gets me to the hospital where, you know, your dad puts the stent in. I then go to cardiac, what do they call it? Cardiac care, CCU. Go to CCU, that team looks after me, and then there's rehab after that. So it's an incredible system that, yes, you take for granted until you need it. And I think for me, you know, waking up in hospital being told that you're 1 in 10 to survive, being told that your chest is going to be very sore from where they've done CPR on you, then learning all this stuff and thinking, hang on, if only 1 in 10 survive, but there's like 30,000 people a year that are going through this in Australia, why did I not know more about this beforehand, given that when I collapsed, I rely on the people around me. I don't rely on your dad. I don't rely on the ambulance. I rely on them to do CPR. Well, first of all, to diagnose what the hell's wrong with me correctly, diagnose that I'm not breathing, start CPR and use an AED. All those things have to be done before I even get to the hospital, before the paramedics even get there. Because if none of that's done before the paramedics arrive, I would not have survived. I would not be here. So for me, my passion became educating the community about the stuff that I did not know, and the stuff where there was this massive void, that if more people have that void that can be filled with information and confidence to respond and react in that situation, we might see more survivors. We might not see what I now know is only 5% of that 30,000 number surviving. We want to get to 10%, but that means doubling the number of survivors. We want to get to 20%, we want to get to 30%. But there's a lot of things that play into that space that affect those survival numbers.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, when the bystanders use the AED to save your life or bring you back, what do you think were the main misconceptions or things that the public didn't know that you since tried to fix afterwards?
Look, as I understand it, even though there was an AED at the RSL club where we were performing, I think it's safe to say that a lot of people at the club weren't sure where it was.
Yeah.
And even then, it was in somebody's office, I believe, in a drawer, I believe. And if that's not 100% correct, and it's no slight on the club, believe me, a lot of places are in this situation where AEDs are not visible, they're not accessible, and they may not be actionable. They might not even be in good operation. The pads or the battery might be expired. They might not be working, right? So those three key things. So I think from my perspective, thank God what happened at Castle Hill RSL, number one, they were able to say that the AED that they purchased 10 years before saved my life. But then they actually supported my mission afterwards, but they personally purchased more AEDs for the club because they knew that it was too far from where they had to go from the auditorium down to wherever it was to get the AED and get back through crowds and whatever else. So they've purchased more AEDs, they've made them more visible in the club. So I think that's one thing. Knowing where an AED is, but not just knowing where it is, knowing that it's accessible within a timely, a short time frame, because time matters, right? As I said earlier, we don't know how long that person's got before their heart is not going to be shockable, right? And when I say shockable, I mean, if somebody's heart stops, it's not always the case that we can use the AED to shock their heart and get it working again. But we don't know until we get the AED on the patient, because it reads the heart rhythm and it will tell you, is the person able to be shocked? It could be 1 minute, it could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 7. We've got no idea. But that's why AEDs are so crucial, because they know. As soon as you put it on, it can tell you what the heart is doing, and it will tell you. And the sooner you get it on, the sooner you've got that device becoming your team leader. It talks to you, it tells you what to do. So that's the other thing that I never knew. And I think the two responders for me that were given the AED were both medical people. One was the GP, Therese. The other one was Grace. At the time, she was a nurse on rotation, but I think at the time she was in the cardiac unit. But they were both given this AED, automated external defibrillator. Now, as medical people, they know what a defibrillator is, and they know what it's used for, and they know how to use that device. But this device, the AED, is designed for general public to use. They'd never seen one before, they'd never used it. But thankfully, they saw that there was a power button that they turned on, and it started talking to them, and it guided them in what to do. They knew the principle. They knew that there was going to be pads somewhere to put on me, and they knew the principle, but they had never used one of those devices. So I think what that tells you is that you don't need to be a nurse, you don't need to be a doctor, you just need to be somebody who's prepared to turn something on, listen to it, and give it a go. And that AEDs are so simple to use that even a child could do it. You don't need to be knowledgeable, you don't need to have experience with them, just give it a go. Because when somebody collapses, if they're not responding, call 000. If they're not breathing normally or at all, start CPR and use the AED. And if you're frightened at all, the AED is probably going to give you that little bit of confidence to know that it's there with you, making the decisions, because you don't make decisions once you turn the AED on. It reads the heart rhythm. It tells you whether you should be doing CPR or whether you need to shock the patient. Yeah.
And then after your recovery phase, how long did it take you to have the idea for Heart of the Nation? And what was the process for that? Yeah.
Look, I remember within a day, I think the day that I woke up in hospital, I was really still trying to comprehend everything, but I kind of knew what had happened, and I knew that there were these things called smartwatches around that could read heart rhythms. So I'd already started thinking about, because this is why, because Vanessa said to me, she said, thank God it happened on stage where there were people around. She said, if that had have happened when you were out on one of your walks, because the walks that I do go through kind of a bushland track. If I'd have collapsed on one of my walks, I might not have been found for 10 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes by somebody else walking past. And I guess that's when I started thinking, oh, geez, well, what if I had because I didn't have a smartwatch back then. I thought, what if I had a smartwatch? Then that would have, known. And anyway, that's when I started thinking about, well, how can we change this? Because again, she was saying in my situation, what if? So like I said, everything went right for me, but what if things hadn't gone right?
Yeah.
So I started thinking about things and how I could affect some change. And I think after the smartwatch idea, the next thing I thought about was the fact that there are these things called AEDs in the community that I'd never noticed. Like I'd walked past them many times and never really thought about it. I thought that these things on the wall in cabinets were actually first aid kits.
Yeah.
So my first idea was to make AEDs more visible in the community, but also to kind of, like the Australian Made campaign with the little sticker that says Made in Australia.
Yeah.
Like that, have a little sticker that people can put on the front door of their business to say AED inside. Because if somebody collapses in a street, right, what a terrible thing to happen, that somebody collapses right outside the door of a business that's got an AED inside, but the responders don't know there's an AED in there.
Yeah.
Right? So make these things more visible to the whole community by putting a sticker on the door of a business and saying, so that way when you walk into that business, you might see the sticker and you know, oh, there's an AED here. So if you're in proximity to that business and somebody collapses, you at least know you can go and get an AED from that place. So that grew into this thing where the program was going to be called, well, if you've got an AED in your business, you're at the heart of the nation in the fight against cardiac arrest. So that's where the idea for a program or initiative called Heart of the Nation came from. Then as time went on, so that started, I think, May 2020, sort of, I had the idea probably in March, and then by May we launched a not-for-profit organisation called Heart of the Nation. And I think at that point I thought, well, okay, if people are signing up to this initiative, then we know the location of AEDs.
Yep.
So we're kind of building up an AED register on a national level. And that then sort of grew into a bit of a passion project to try and build a national register of AEDs. Like, there's national registers for lots of things, whereby no matter where you live in Australia or where your business is, you can register your AED and create a map that shows around Australia where all the AEDs are.
Yeah.
Well, I soon came to learn that state ambulance services already maintain an AED register in a lot of states at that point in time. So I started talking with the ambulance services and spoke about, can we share data? And that was a barrier, apparently, being able to share data, so that never happened. And there were a lot of barriers along the way. But yeah, the idea was just essentially to try and fill that knowledge gap. And when we talk about this thing called the chain of survival, these three links, call, push, shock, in a lot of cases they don't actually link up. And we might have people calling 000 but not always starting CPR. So those two links don't automatically join up. That person's then waiting on the paramedics to come and then do the CPR, but by then it might be too late. Same with an AED. You've got call, you might have somebody pushing, and those two links are great, but then where's the AED? That third link in the chain of survival, which is crucial to restarting the heart, just falls away. It gets ignored. So how do we educate the public to know the importance of having an AED when somebody collapses and they're not breathing and we need to restart their heart, but also how do we encourage businesses to have an AED and make the community aware of that through a register or a sign. Brighter signage too was another thing that we developed, and we looked at studies to try and prove that having a bright yellow sign would draw people's attention to an AED more so than a green medical sign that could be confused with first aid or a number of different things. So this initiative, or what ended up becoming a charity called Heart of the Nation, tried to fill those gaps, and we implemented a lot of programs. We built an app to show the location of those AEDs that we had registered with us on a national level, not just on a state level, and we had a lot of people getting in touch with us saying, look, how can we find an AED? I'm in Victoria, but I'm travelling to Queensland. How can I find where the AEDs are in Queensland? Because in Victoria, yes, they've got a state register that shows the map of AEDs in Victoria, but where's the one for Queensland? Well, there wasn't one for Queensland. So without a national AED register, there's all these missing pieces, and I just get so frustrated because it can be the case. It's not just about knowing where an AED is at the time that somebody collapses. It's not just about ambulance being able to direct somebody at that point in time. It's about people being prepared in advance, right? Because if I'm out somewhere and somebody collapses, I see that person collapse, but somebody else goes to attend to them and they're doing the right thing. I'm thinking, geez, that person might not be breathing. You know what? I'm going to go and get an AED in case it's needed. Because I know the quicker it's on that person, if they're not breathing and their heart has stopped, the more chance they're going to be shockable. And this did happen to me once afterwards. I was at the local shopping centre, I was at a cafe, and this girl collapsed, fell over. And there was a table next to her. They went to her immediate assistance, and they seemed to be well in control. They were calling 000. And I knew there was a Woolies just next door, so I just went over and grabbed their AED and I brought it over and I just had it there. And I felt confident knowing that if she stopped breathing, the AED was right there. Didn't rely upon 000 saying, do you know where your nearest AED is? And relying upon that person on the phone, knowing what an AED is, and them knowing where it was, or being able to get it. It was there, ready to go. So for me, the more prepared that we can have the community to have that thing ready in case it's needed, rather than waiting to get onto 000, being patched through, telling them the conditions, waiting for them to say, do you know if there's an AED nearby? Know in advance, get it there as quickly as possible. That's one scenario. There's many other scenarios, and I think the bigger picture is that we have this thing that is essentially a living network of AEDs where data is updated regularly and we know the status of the AEDs, so that when we do want to go and get an AED, we're not going to one that we think, oh gee, is that one going to be working? Are the pads within the expiry date, or is it out of expiry? As opposed to knowing, yeah, that one's good to get, that one's not. So I'm not going to go to that one, I'm going to go to that one instead. So I think there's all these things, big picture, that I still want to work towards, and I will be working towards these things, because like the Wiggles, where passion's involved, it's very hard to put a lid on that passion when you can see things that need to be done differently. Even if it bucks the system, I don't care. I really don't care, because at the end of the day, what matters most is that I want everyone that collapses with cardiac arrest to have that same chance of survival that I had. I want somebody to see them, recognise it, call 000, start CPR, and have an AED on their chest as quickly as possible. Because if we can do that, number one, we can know that they've had every chance of survival. Number two, we know that if we do that, there's going to be more people surviving. I just know it. I absolutely know it. I mean, the evidence suggests that, right? And my my gut instinct also tells me that if we can do that for more people are going to survive. And I mean, yes, it's taken a while to get to this point now. We're still not at the best point we should be in or at. But if we continue along this way with more people being educated, more people responding, more AEDs in the community, if we continue, we're going to get to a point where we will see more survivors. The numbers will stack up. But one barrier to that at the moment is just the number of people that collapse at home and are unwitnessed. So that's why for me, this smartwatch technology is important because, again, Vanessa said, not just that what would have happened if I was out on my walk. The day before I had my cardiac arrest, I was out in the backyard at home doing some heavy lifting of pavers and manual labour in the hot sun. It was like a 36-degree day, but I wanted to get this paving done, so I was. She said, if you'd have collapsed in the backyard even if I was at home, I may not have found you for 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour before I thought, where's Greg? I haven't seen him for a while, and then gone to look for you. So it's those cardiac arrests that happen when people are at home, even with loved ones at home, not in the same room. If we can change that, let alone the people who are on their own, if we can get neighbours to be notified to go and check on someone because, the smartwatch has said their heart's not beating, go and check. If we can narrow that window down between their collapse and them being found, there's more chance they'll survive.
Yeah, and could you talk a bit more about the technology or the different things that are available for detecting cardiac arrests and notifying, starting that process of notification?
Yeah, so look, I think we're at a point in time now where technology is really working against us, but also for us. And I think some people are putting their time into the stuff that works against us as humanity, but a lot of people are focusing on the stuff that's going to work for us, and that's where I'm putting my focus. If we have technology that can read our heart rhythm, it can read heart rhythm, but more simply, can it read our heart rate? Does it know that we have a heart rate? Right? If it knows we have a heart rate, it knows we're alive. If it's not reading a heart rate, then surely there's something wrong. We're either not alive or we're on our way to not being alive. So we need to be checked on. So that technology can then actually send a message to nearby responders, whether it be your loved one at home who can get a message on their phone saying, hey, go check on this person because their watch is telling us that they might not be in that good a shape. So that whole interconnectedness of a community response to cardiac arrest and the technology that we have at our disposal, then linking that in with with AED registers and ambulance, it brings those links in the chain of survival much closer together, if not linking them up in more cases of cardiac arrest. That's our goal. Right, everyone knows that. Everyone in this space knows that that's what we're trying to achieve. I guess the thing is, it's like a lot of things. When you have, let's say, the first people that invented cars invented a brake, right? It worked to an extent. Was it the best system? Has it been improved since? Yes. How many times has it been improved since? Many, 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 many times. Are there still improvements that could be made today to a braking system on a car? Yeah, probably. So why should we not be investigating those? Why would we just rely on evidence that says that a system is working? Shouldn't we be looking at what are the improvements that can be made to that system, and are there things out there now that can do that for us? And should we be implementing those now and testing those and getting the evidence on those? Like with the signage for AEDs, right? There's a lot of evidence that says, yes, the green and white sign is an effective sign for AEDs. There's also evidence that says it's not, right? So it's like anything. It's where your confirmation bias lies that you'll look at that evidence to support your case or whatever. But we need to look beyond that. We need to look at other alternatives sometimes that open our eyes to say, well, is something a better option than something that might be working? Yes, it might be working, but is it working the best it can? Okay, now, We know that in survival for cardiac arrest, there's different measures, and this might get a little bit complicated for some people. When we talk about survival, what do we mean? Well, what I mean in most times when I say it, it's 5% of the total number of cardiac arrests that occur. Ambulance services like to use a number that's closer to 10, 11 or 12% of resuscitations attempted. Now I get that, I understand that, but you can't say that, you can't cross-read the numbers. You can't say survival's 12% of the 30,000 number, because it's not, right? It's 12% of a smaller number, roughly half, where resuscitation is attempted on the person. Then you've got this thing called the Utstein survival rate, which, if I'm remembering correctly, it's where the patient collapses, where they're witnessed to have their collapse witnessed, where 000 is called, where CPR is administered, and where they are in a shockable rhythm. Yes. And an AED is used, or paramedics shock them. So that's the Utstein comparator. Now, in a place like Seattle, people have quoted survival statistics up to 65%, right? 65%, but that's of the Utstein comparator group, so it's of a much smaller number. It's not of 30,000. So I don't think we'll ever get to 65% survival of the total number of cardiac arrests that occur. But what we can do is we can aspire to get to that 60, 65, 70% of survival in the Utstein comparator group. We're not there yet. I think I saw a report from Ambulance Victoria that came out this week saying that they're at 44%. So yeah, they're getting there. So we know there's improvements to be made. So why aren't we getting those improvements? Why are those numbers, they're increasing steadily, but they're not sort of skyrocketing. Now we know that in Denmark, survival rates doubled within a 5-year period when there were certain things done within their systems. Number one, they introduced an AED register. They introduced CPR education as mandatory in schools. They they offered, home education kits for CPR education. There was a couple of other things they did. I can't think off the top of my head, but those 4 or 5 strategies that they implemented within that 5-year period saw a doubling in the survival rate. Yeah. And I read somewhere recently that they tripled the survival rate in 10 years. I'd have to check that, but somebody made mention of that the other day. So if we can triple, and I don't care which number we're talking about, if it's the 5% overall survival rate, the 10% of resuscitations attempted, or the Utstein group, if we can double or triple those numbers, surely we should be seeing massive jumps in shorter periods of time. That's what I want to see. Yeah. Now I know that there are barriers. I know there are things that hinder that progression, but I just think that collectively, we should be doing. I say this as in altruistic kind of way. We should be doing more. I think there's more that we can be doing, because I think that perhaps some of the systems that we are relying upon aren't necessarily the best they can be. I'm not saying that they're not good and they're not doing a job, but I think there's improvements that can be made that can see quicker gains.
Yeah, and we've talked a bit about the sort of awareness side of things, of the chain of survival and of AEDs being in a particular location. We talked a bit about detection, of how to detect an AED, a cardiac arrest, depending on where it's happening. But in this picture as well, an AED does have to be physically there. Could you talk a bit more about the provision side of things? Like, for example, when we think about mitigating fire risk, like there's a fire hydrant that is mandated to be in a location. Is similar things happening in the space of cardiac arrest risk mitigation with AED provision?
Yeah, there is. And we did a big research paper on laws all around the world, and that is so comprehensive, and that's massive. That was a massive undertaking to do, because the way that AED legislation takes place throughout the world is so varied and different. In Australia, interestingly, the only state or territory that has any legislation around AEDs is South Australia. Now, that was groundbreaking legislation. Thank God that got through. I guess one thing I was personally a bit disappointed with was kind of the scaling back of the the criteria that made a premises fall into the legislation. I understand why it was done. I understand businesses not wanting to have to comply with buying an additional piece of equipment that they may not ever need. Totally get that. But businesses and households, we all do it. We all pay for insurance, or most people pay for insurance of things like their car, their house, their life, medical insurance. We outlay in the hope that we never need it, but in case we do, we've got it there. So I think for a long time, with Heart of the Nation, my vision was that we weren't going to try to put the onus on people through legislation to tell them they've got to have this device called an AED, but through just being altruistic and aspiring to be a good community citizen, we would encourage people to do that. Well, not everybody works in that way. Legislation though, when this came in, people still wanted to try to get around it. So the legislation was peeled back, and I can't remember the specifics of it now, but I think it is essentially now that if you have publicly accessible floor space of, gosh, I think it was 1,200 square metres.
A certain number.
Yeah, gosh, I should have brushed up on this before this chat, but the point is this: whereas that number of 1,200 square metres was applicable to the whole premises, it's now not applicable if the premises is not publicly accessible. So let's say you've got a premises of 1,200 square metres and you've got 60 workers in that space. If your reception area is 10 square metres, you don't need to have an AED under legislation, right? My view is you could have 60 workers there, all doing physically onerous labour, and maybe at risk of having a cardiac arrest, but you now don't have to have an AED. The position, I think, from health was that, well, safe work practices should cover that. But my understanding is that safe work doesn't cover it. It's like, well, do an assessment, do your own assessment, and if you think your workers might be at risk because of electrocution or other things, probably a good idea to have an AED, but you're not required to have one. So I think legislation needs to be drafted in such a way that's going to have the most benefit. The other aspect of the legislation where I felt it kind of fell short, and this is not due to Frank Pangello or anybody who was pushing for this, it's the people who are pushing back against it. We know that 80% of cardiac arrests happen at home. Yeah. This legislation puts the most AEDs into places of business or places of work. Now, yes, cardiac arrests happen in public. It's about 10% that happen in public. So about 80% happen in home, 10% in public, 10% in aged care or nursing homes. That's roughly the figures. So for those 10% of cardiac arrests that happen in public or in workplaces, yep, some of those places will have greater access to an AED. But of those 10%, and again, I don't know the exact numbers because there's no evidence to support this other than anecdotal evidence from talking to paramedics who will tell me that in their view, the 10% that happen in public, probably 80% don't happen in workplaces. They happen out on the street or in other places where they're not in the immediate vicinity of an AED. So again, it's kind of pot luck as to where you have your cardiac arrest determines whether you survive or not. And that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to not have it that way. And again, people will look at the evidence of socioeconomic areas where most cardiac arrests happen, so try and put more in those places. Heart of the Nation had a paper written for it by an economist who basically said, look, the cost to the economy of cardiac arrests every year in Australia of cardiac cause is about $35 billion a year, right? Now, if we were to put an AED in every neighbourhood around Australia, so there was one AED for every 50 homes that could get to it more quickly, the cost of that would be far, 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 far less than the $35 billion lost through productivity, extra support for families that lose a loved one who's a breadwinner, all these things that add up. would be far outweighed by the cost of just implementing AEDs in residential areas, let alone in businesses and those kinds of places.
And that's also a cost that you incur once and it lasts.
Well, yeah, it is once, but there is upkeep and maintenance involved, but that's a fraction again, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So for me, that's frustrating. I mean, we spend money on the annual bowel screening program, which saves lives. We spend money on road safety that saves lives. And I get that, a lot of people drive, and there's a lot of arguments for and against a whole lot of things. And I get that I have a personal interest in this because my life was saved by an AED. But if we're going to look at evidence, the evidence tells us that an AED is crucial to increasing somebody's chance of survival, not guaranteeing their survival, but increasing their chance. And we also know that cardiac arrest can happen anywhere, anytime. It's not pre-prescribed to, we know a lot of it does happen when people are exercising or at work, yes, but we know it happens mostly at home. So let's work on creating an environment where there is an AED accessible to everyone. Not across the whole country. I'm not that, if you're driving across the Nullarbor, there should not be just an AED at every 2-minute point across the Nullarbor. But we can implement a program where most people are covered, where they are most likely to have a cardiac arrest. And it's not always down to socio-economic factors. I know that plays a part, and we can try to increase that. But look, there's lots of data, there's lots of evidence about a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, I just want to see that survival number increase as quickly as possible.
Well, it's in the interest of everybody to see that increase as well.
And the frustrating thing about it is that, in most cases of cardiac arrest, it is reversible. It's not a death sentence. As soon as you collapse with cardiac arrest, it's not a given that you won't be resuscitated, or it's not a given that you're 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 to survive. Right? What is a given is that if we get that AED and if we have that correct system supporting the bystanders who become, the GP to diagnose the problem, they become the basic life support specialist to administer CPR, they become the kind of advanced life support system until paramedics arrive. We rely upon bystanders who have no experience, no qualifications. We rely upon them. So let's educate them, but more than educate them, let's give them the support they need with the tools to be able to give that person every chance.
And I think an important resource that people should look at is our analysis that we did of the world's laws of public access defibrillation, because we actually give recommendations that are very simple, cost-effective, easily implementable at a large scale, and that people can look at and learn from. But looking ahead for Australia, what are the things that the states can do, and also federally, that the country can do to try and work towards this problem, or trying to save more lives from cardiac arrest, or prevent more deaths from it as well?
So I'm going to be controversial, and I'm going to say that we need a federal approach to it, essentially. It's not something that happens only in certain states, it happens in every state. And we have great ambulance services in every state that support the community. But I really do think we need a federal approach, and it needs to, because, certain states have made advances in certain areas through certain things. So why aren't other states doing those things? What are those barriers? And because we have a federated health system, unfortunately, sometimes that's the answer. It's because, they don't have the funding or whatever. So I think when we look at the benefits of survivorship, when somebody survives cardiac arrest, where are those benefits felt? Yes, they're felt on a state level, but more so on a national level, I think. So things like, somebody who survives and goes back to work, productivity is measured at a national level. Taxes, income tax is paid at a federal level. They're spending, sure, GST on a state level, but there's great benefit on a federal, national level. So my belief is that more needs to be done federally, specifically for cardiac arrest, and fed down to the states. And that the national or federal approach needs to involve things like education in schools, making sure that children are educated about cardiac arrest, given that 80% happen at home. So who's most likely to find mum or dad? God forbid, or grandma or grandpa collapsed, most likely a child, or they'll be present and have to experience that. So we should prepare them, hopefully that they don't ever have to experience that, but so they know. And if mum and dad don't know what to do, the child is often the best person to educate mum and dad on what needs to be done. So that's one thing. I think federally, yes, I still believe that there needs to be a national register of AEDs. Number one, it makes it simpler for big organisations who are across the nation to register all their AEDs in one spot. One format of information to feed it in can be fed out in different formats for the states if they want it in different formats for the states. So the National AED Register. And look, I do think that the federal government should fund AEDs for the community, and it should be implemented not by ambulance, right? And this is where I'm going to buck the system. I think ambulance say that they own the space of cardiac arrest. Look, yes, they feature heavily in the space for cardiac arrest because we need them, but at the end of the day, that person's survival comes down to ambulance getting there. So yes, that's the call part of the chain of survival. But the push and the shock needs to come from community. So we need, it doesn't matter what state you're in. You as a bystander should be supported with civil liability action, legislation that prevents you from being prosecuted. You should be supported with the education to know what to do. You should be supported with the after support as well, after being through that experience of responding to a cardiac arrest. Your mental health needs to be dealt with. But crucially, you need to have access to an AED, whether that's that you can go and get one rapidly, or a child in your household, a neighbour, another bystander, wherever you happen to be. There should be an AED within a minute and a half of where you are, that somebody can go and get. So it's a minute and a half to go get it, a minute and a half to come back. That's 3 minutes. Even that's too long, but we'll go with that number because they say 3 minutes. So I just think that at a national level, more should be done to support the implementation or the proliferation of AEDs in the community. And look, I do believe there should be a national standard for a sign for an AED. I believe it should be yellow because I think it needs to be different to the green signage that exists for first aid kits. Now people will say, oh, yellow, well, weren't you the yellow wiggle? Is that why you want to have yellow signs? No, it's not. It's kind of why the idea came about, but it's not why I want them to be yellow. Because if you look at a bright yellow sign, it is attention grabbing, right? You see yellow road signs because they grab your attention. People wear high-vis yellow vests because they grab your attention. So I think if we make AEDs more visible through bright yellow signage with a red heart on it, then that just subconsciously will draw people's attention to where AEDs are in the community, so that when they need them, they know, oh yeah, I remember I saw that sign somewhere. So all these things, I think, are places where the federal government can sort of step in and help regulate and administrate to a certain extent, because that proliferation of AEDs in the community is going to require some management and ongoing maintenance of that program. And I think a government agency could do that.
But as you said, it's a very cost-effective thing because there is like an initial cost that also is relatively low, but then the maintenance costs and maintenance requirements of how much you need to check it is actually extremely low.
Yeah, so you make the costs of the let's say you look at it over an 8-year time period, because some AEDs have batteries and pads that last for 4 years or 8 years. So if we go to the 8-year window, you basically cover the cost in year one with survivors, right, that could potentially be saved with more rapid access to AEDs. If it's not year one, it might be year 2 or maybe even year 3. But then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you're getting that whole benefit for those years back of 35 billion a year, let's say. So it's just massive.
And something you touched on about the like the yellow signage, or just the more visually attention grabbing signage. We've actually published work showing that it's actually going to grab people's attention, help with identification, but also the standardization aspect of it as well. Could you talk a bit more detail about that?
So I guess we talk a lot about evidence in this space, and I think the interesting thing about the studies that we've done to date on the signage, there's a third one that I've done that we haven't actually really looked at yet, which we should continue on and publish. But the first two were really about people's perception.
Yeah.
And I think, so we basically asked, what do you think would be a better sign for this? And I think the key about this is context.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand the role that an AED plays and its importance in that chain of survival. So until you tell them, and I think that's what we did in the study, we said, look, do you know what an AED is? Do you know what it does? And we educated them along the way through the survey questions that were asked to get them to the point where they realise that, yes, an AED is important. It's not just like a first aid kit to patch a finger or, whatever. It actually makes a big difference. So when you put the context around the question, people then think, well, hang on, if I need to know where an AED is quickly or rapidly or in advance, what's going to help me find it? Then yes, the yellow signage stands out and becomes, dare I say it, a no-brainer, because people understand that it's going to be needed rapidly. I need to find it quickly in a crowded or cluttered environment, and a green sign might blend in. It might not be as, it doesn't stand out as much as the yellow sign does. So when people have the context and the understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve, the solution becomes a no-brainer. And I can't remember the numbers, but the other thing is not just the signage for the AED, but the cabinet colour as well. So I think that the signage and the cabinet should both be bright yellow. So then you've got this mass of bright yellow that you're looking for in a community. The thing that frustrates me is that when you have people doing installations of AEDs where the cabinet might be white, the sign's green, or the cabinet might be green and the sign is white, or the cabinet might be red and the sign's green. Consistency and uniformity of the colour of the cabinet and the device, the signage and the device's cabinet are important too. Because if you're looking for a sign that's got a white background and a red heart, what are you looking for on the wall? Am I looking for a white cabinet with a red thing on it, or am I looking for a green? All of a sudden I get there and there's this green cabinet. Is that the thing I'm looking for? We can't assume that everybody knows as much as we do about this. We have to assume that people don't know. So that if somebody says, go and get the AED, well, what's an AED? Okay, I'll look for a sign that sign says AED, but what's underneath it? Well, this red box, is that fire equipment, or is that, what the hell's that? But if the colour of the box matches the sign, then there's a good chance that what's in that box is what I'm going to need. So I'll grab that and take it to the person that's told me to go get it. So I think there's all these things that might seem trivial or minuscule, and people will say, well, there's no evidence to support that. We don't have any evidence to say that people have trouble finding. Has anybody done the research on that properly? Has anybody actually asked people, have you ever been asked to go and get an AED? What's going to help you find it? There's all this stuff. But anyway, there's a long way to go in this space, and hopefully we'll get there one day.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to highlight is that in the moment, in a really stressful situation, you need this process to be a reflex where subconsciously they can sort of handle the trauma of the situation, but then also move quickly on reflex to go and get this life-saving device.
And think about it too, right? We're not talking about just the person who's kneeling down beside the patient. Hopefully that person is the one that takes the lead and says, right, I'm going to do this, you do that, and you go and get the AED. Now you might not have even heard of that before, and what am I looking for, and the stress and the panic of that person. So yes, whatever makes it easier for that person is what we've got to strive to help support all of those people in that situation, so that all of them feel confident that if you're ever asked to do something, you know roughly what's going on and you know roughly what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, because I think, like you touched on about potentially your understanding before all of this, is that it could be misconceived as a first aid kit, or it could be misconceived as something else. So I think that's a very important point. I think something else that is important to highlight is you touched on needing for legal protection for people who go and do respond, like do take it upon themselves to put themselves out there and try and save this person's life. Could you touch could you talk a bit more about that? Because I think a misconception or a fear that a lot of people have to being a first responder is that if they don't do a good enough job and say the person dies or harm comes to them because either they live but they're disabled afterwards, they fear that something is going to be coming to them in terms of blame or either other sort of legal harm. Could you talk a bit more about that?
I think there's a couple of things to touch on there. So the first thing I'll touch on, just broadly, this is a broad response. I would say to people, don't be afraid to do something. Because when it comes to cardiac arrest, doing anything is better than nothing. Right? Anything that you can do is going to be better than doing nothing at all. The second thing about that is that, you know, we don't know what's happening inside that person. So we can only do what we've sort of been told to do as lay responders. And that is, if they're not responding, you know, if you can't wake them up, if they don't respond to you, call 000. If they're not breathing at all, or if it sounds like they're not breathing normally, together with the fact that you can't wake them up, right? That's not normal. So start CPR straight away and use the AED as soon as you can. But we don't know what's caused them to be in that state. Right? We've got no idea, potentially, if they've just collapsed. Could be anything. But that's the correct response. So if you do that, you can put your head on the pillow at night and know that no matter what the outcome is, and you may never know what the outcome is. I know there are people who have done CPR on people and never known if that person has survived or not. You may never know. But if you find out that that person has not survived or survived with not a good outcome, it's not on you. Right? You didn't cause them to get into that situation, right? You've used good faith, and this is where the Civil Liability Act doesn't protect you, is that if you did do something to put that person in that situation, you're not protected by civil liability. So, for instance, if I were to punch somebody and they end up in that situation, I would not be protected by civil liability. If I do something to try to help them, I'd still be responsible for putting them in that situation. As a responder, if you come into the situation and you see the person, if you, in good faith, do the things that we say, call, push and shock, the rest of it is beyond your control. You can't control it. So you should put your head on the pillow knowing that you've done the right thing as a citizen. And I'm not saying that this is going to be easy to do, because I know that even in my case, where I survived, I know that some of my responders still had a bit of trouble dealing with the situation. It's confronting, it's distressing, it's, you know, kind of literally life and death. So that person, you know, is in a situation where they rely upon you, but you're not going to be the cause of what happens to them. So you've got to remember that. So talking about the civil liability, one thing I didn't know until fairly recently is that there is one state in Australia where they don't have a Civil Liability Act that protects Good Samaritans responding to cardiac arrest or any first aid situation. Unfortunately, they're looking at that. They're going to try and get that changed. But I was under the impression up until recently that every state covered you. But yeah, basically, if you respond in good faith, you'll be protected. Okay, so no matter what the outcome. So that's the legal side of it. But I do think the more important side is that emotional and mental side for the responders. And that's where I think the federal government needs to build a strong program too, around this whole thing, to make a complete system of support for everyone. And when I say support, I mean for the person who collapses, so that they're supported by community who is supported by the government.
Well, it's a bigger societal good as well, all of this.
You know, we have national campaigns about skin cancer, slip, slop, slap. We have national campaigns about a whole range of things, but not cardiac arrest. Why not? Why is the federal government not supporting, you know, and I'll break it down to the state level here, they should be supporting ambulance more, with more funding for the paramedics to get out there and help. The systems, sometimes the systems that the paramedics and the ambulance services are using don't need to be operated by paramedics. They can be done by people that can deal with data management and things like that. So let's remove that from the ambulance services. Let's let the paramedics and ambulance focus on being paramedics and an ambulance service. Let's shift some of those other systems to another organisation. That can be a national agency or organisation that can administer these things on behalf of the states. So yeah, I think we just need to get to that point where, as a society, the societal good is actually not just reaped or benefited at the national level, but it's actually supported at that level too.
Yeah, and it's a good thing for even local communities. If you drill down even within states, within different councils, like within the communities themselves, if somebody in your community has had an instance like this, had an event and been through something like that, that can impact the community as well. And I think something that's not talked about is the social impact of a lot of this. Like if you think about it, like your event would have definitely affected your family, your friends, your network, and people who knew you as well. So just talk a bit more about that aspect as well.
Well, look, I will talk about it specifically in my case, right? Yeah. I'll give you a great example. So at the time I had my cardiac arrest, my two youngest kids were in primary school. I think they were both in primary school. And I remember going up to the primary school one day to pick the kids up, and the principal came up to me and said, "Oh, look, thank God you're okay." Yeah. She said, "But you know what? You made me realise that we need to have an AED here at school. Yeah. Not, we have Grandparents' Day here. We have And I said, "Hey, you know what? It's not just about grandparents. Yeah. It's about the staff. Yeah. It's about the kids. It's about contractors who come onto your site to work. Anybody could have a cardiac arrest. It could be one of the kids." So I said, "Yeah, good on you. Get an AED." My cricket club, where I play cricket, one of the guys, the captain of my team at the time, Vaughan, he had been pushing the club for some time before to get an AED for every team. No result. And finally, after my event, the club went, "Oh, you know what, maybe we should do this." So they got some more, not enough for every team, but they got more AEDs. So it does have an impact. It has a flow-on effect. And I think importantly, talking about, at a local level, and this is sometimes the pushback that I get when I talk about it being something that's driven from a federal level. People will say, "Oh, but our systems are different here in this state, or are different in this community. They need something different." Okay, well, they can have something different, but it can still be supported from a federal level. Yeah. What is it that's going to work in your community? Do you have... So some communities might not want AEDs out in public at bus stops in unlocked cabinets because, theft, vandalism, whatever. Okay, so put them somewhere else where they're not as visible, but most people in the community know where they are and they can go and get them when needed. So with Heart of the Nation, we tried many different things, and we were big advocates of having 24/7 accessible AEDs, unlocked cabinets, just where people could grab them any time of the day or night. And what we did find, and we did have not a paper, but we had a letter to the editor published with some of this data. We found that where they were in the highly visible places like bus stops, there was a much greater incidence of theft and vandalism on those ones, as opposed to the ones that were on public buildings, let's say like a sporting ground amenities block, than as opposed to on the side of private homes where there were no instances of theft or vandalism, right? So where you place it directly affects visibility, but also higher rates of theft and vandalism. So different communities may see value in placing them in different places, because in some communities, I know in some regional towns in Australia, where they do have them highly visible, there's been no theft. Yep. Right? So it comes down to community attitudes. So yes, it does come down to those local nuances, but that doesn't mean it can't be driven from the federal government. Yep. Just adapt the program to work for you, and it doesn't mean it has to cost vast amounts more to adapt it. It just is local knowledge and common sense.
Yeah, because the people will support other people in your local community or people that even if you are a stranger to the person. These are all simple things that can be done.
They are. And now I do got to say one thing in response to that. People will support people to an extent. Okay? So I still 6 years on, I'm still banging my head up against the wall because we don't have enough awareness yet and enough education about the problem. And like me, I wasn't in this space, I wasn't as passionate about it until it affected me directly. So what we find is that yes, it affects people more directly. People are more passionate and more prepared to support where they have been affected directly. Either they've survived, they've lost somebody, and also what I find too is that where people have lost somebody to cardiac arrest, generally speaking, their support is more for prevention of cardiac arrest. So the preventative strategies and funding those kinds of programs. Whereas survivors, because of the benefit that they directly see the benefit of that chain of survival, they're more interested in supporting that. So there's kind of these disparities where, you know, people's personal experience affects their predilection for where they're going to be offering their support.
Yeah. So taking all of this into account, going forward from here, what are you planning or looking ahead to continue driving towards this North Star that you have?
Well, the thing that guides me is knowing that there can be more survivors, because you know, we've seen the evidence of that. So I know that can be true because of evidence. I know it can be true also too just because of anecdotal things that I see. I see the gaps in the system. I see where things can be improved and should be improved. So my passion now is to continue to fill those gaps and make sure that those filling the gaps brings those links in the chain of survival together so that they do link up in more cases of cardiac arrest for people around Australia. Making sure that, you know, as best possible, that no matter where you are, no matter who you collapse around, if you don't collapse around somebody will find you sooner, and that somebody will know what to do, and they'll have the tools to support them during that time and afterwards as well. So that's really what's going to drive me. How I do that, who I do it with, I'm not really sure yet at this point, but you know, it does come down to aligning with like-minded people. You know, people who share the same vision, because if they don't share the vision, I think there is a group of people in Australia who are well-intentioned, definitely well-intentioned, and they'll probably say the same thing back to me. They know I'm well-intentioned, but I'm not doing things the way that they would do it, and that's fine. They're not doing things the way that I think it should be done either. So hopefully, with all these groups still working towards the same goal, we can be doing things differently, and we'll get there. That's all that matters, that we get there. Rightly, wrongly, together, apart, doesn't matter. As long as we get there. My goal is to just make sure that point that when we get there is closer, not further away.
I think that's a great place to end, and thank you very much for your time, Greg.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you, Josh.